Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
And you want a quality education that allows you to reach your full potential. I am Mark Stucker, and I'm a college coach.
And I am Anika Madden, and I am a parent. And it is Thursday, July 4th, and welcome to episode number 75, Reasons Why Colleges Rescind Acceptances. And this week's news, 4 years of college, $0 in debt, how some countries make higher education affordable. And we're in chapter 75 of 171 answers, and it's about colleges rescinding admissions acceptances. And this week's question asks if there are any bad questions to ask an admissions counselor. And Mark continues his interview with Mr. Steve Schwartz in the final part of how extracurricular activities and other factors that admissions offices use to decide who gets in.
Anika, you were down for the count for a while. I'm glad you're back alive. What had you down? Because you went AWOL on me when I wasn't getting my calls. Uh-oh. Did my podcast partner die on me?
Yes, I did. I came back. And I'm going to tell you, I haven't been hit like that in a minute. It was some kind of virus. Like my whole insides were just blah and nausea and head spinning. And it was just craziness. And I'm sure it has a lot to do with all the transitions we've been doing and moving around and getting, you know how we can't stop moving, Mark.
So. Yeah, I know. I'm just happy to have you back.
Back in action. Yeah.
Look, you're even singing, so that means you're good. You're good to go. You're good to go.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, Nick, I'm kind of nostalgic, and it's 75, which is sort of like a landmark one, 25 away from the biggie.
Oh, darn. That's right.
Yeah. Isn't it? So I feel it's always nice to do something special on landmark episodes. And if you heard, listeners, our last episode last week, I have been at the Harvard Summer Admission Institute for the last 6 days. Admissions utopia, nirvana heaven. And while our listeners will probably never get an opportunity to attend something like this, after speaking with Anika, I think it'd be great to share some highlights that I gleaned from 6 days, just kind of interacting with all those VP of enrollments and deans from 20 of the most selective colleges in the country, private and public. So you're not going to want to miss this, but we're going to have that and have a fifth parter to our episode today. But if you're one of these people that like to click off at the end, you're going to miss it. So at the very end, after our interview, before we close out, we'll come back and do a special segment just on the what I learned amongst some of the brightest minds in the country. What do you think, Anika? Will that work?
I think it sounds awesome.
Great. Well, because of that, I'm not going to do our full countdown like 9 all the way down to 3 like I've been doing. I'm going to jump right into our number 2 and get right down to business. And it is nurse practitioner. Nurse practitioner. For our first-time listeners, we're counting down the 9 fastest-growing jobs in the country that pay $75,000 or more. Nurse practitioners, and we did a full feature on that on episode 57. Dr. David Williams broke it down for us, the different type of nursing options, but it is growing at a rate of 36%. And it is also paying 6 figures plus. So it's a good opportunity to make some good money if you enjoy this work, of course, and with the fast growth rate. So what do they do? Well, nurse practitioners are actually grouped with a number of other nurses in what are known as APRNs, or Advanced Practice Registered Nurses. They're grouped with nurse midwives and nurse anesthetists. And I've worked with several nurse anesthetists that make north of 150. So it can be a really pretty lucrative job. And they coordinate patient care. They provide primary specialty care. And they work in a number of different capacities: hospitals, physicians' offices, and clinics. And so it's definitely going to require a master's if this is what you want to do for specialization. But it is booming as a job. And what do you think, Anika? Nurse practitioner?
I think I know so many nurse practitioners right now. It's ridiculous. And for good reason, because their money is off the charts.
You're going to the hospital all the time or what?
No, family, friends. I know several nurses. Like I know one of a good friend, she transitioned way out of her field and she went back to school to become a nurse. And she's doing it now, and she's doing really well. So yeah, it is booming. I'm surprised it's only 36%.
That's
Man,
fast,
that's
though. That's
awesome.
fast. So they
Right.
they are projecting a job shortage of over 200,000. So it's he's I don't know if you remember, for the longest time they're going to Canada and bringing all kind of nurses over from other countries because it's just a short.
No, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So think about it. If you think, it's important not to just pick a job because of job growth and money if you hate it, but if you think you're cut out for the work, it's something to consider. Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
All right, Mark, this week's article is entitled 4 Years of College, $0 in Debt, How Some Countries Make Higher Education Affordable. And this is written by Miss Lara Takenaga.
Your guess is as good as mine.
Lara, that's right. All right, Lara, we're going to call you Lara. And she's found in the New York Times pretty recently. And so let me just begin how she cites student debt in the U.S. has reached $1.5 trillion versus the many recent graduates in some countries who graduate debt free. So here we are over here sitting at 1.5 trillion versus some are not. And her article shares a selection of responses from graduates from around the world who shared how they were able to achieve the the zero to basically minimal debt with their college degrees. Some of the respondents are from countries like Taiwan, New Zealand, Turkey, Denmark. And Mark, I was amazed by their stories of tuition as low as $375 a semester, 0% interest loans from their government, tuition exemption. I'm just saying, wait, what?
Were you crying over there? Did you shed any crocodile tears?
I mean, it didn't make me want to pack up and move to any of these places, but it's crazy. It's crazy how these governing structures are allowing them to not worry about paying for college. And from the way I read it, Mark, these are quality institutions. Like, these aren't just rabby-shabby places. Like, these are good quality institutions in these places. So, but Mark, one of the underlying themes from each of the respondents that I underscore was that they explain, the beauty out of them coming out of here debt-free or with minimal debt is that it allowed them to really focus on what they wanted to pursue versus what they had to pursue. Mm-hmm. So my big question for you, Mark, was, were any of these surprising to you?
No. And, first of all, I grew up in Canada, so I know how Canada does it. And I have a lot of students I work with, and increasingly more every year, that want to look at international schools. And one of the reasons, is the money. And this article is fascinating because, it shows the reach of the New York Times. They basically reached out and said, share your story about your international college experience. And the New York Times, showing their reach again, 800 people sent in responses from more than 40 countries. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to just read some of the responses, Anika, and then pick up.
No, please do. I thought they were great. Yeah.
So from Denmark, it says Denmark is among the countries in the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development that spends the most on post-secondary education. So they actually spend 1.6% of their GDP, or gross domestic product, where we spend 0.9. So almost double the funding, from their government coffers going toward education. And then the student they interviewed there, or the sent in responses, I attended the Technical University of Denmark from 2008 to 2013, all paid by taxes. And then basically said books may have cost me $500 a semester. And it goes on to say students who don't live with their parents get a monthly stipend from the government to live on. So that was Denmark. And then Taiwan, a person from Taiwan said, and then the person says, I graduated from National Taiwan University in 2012 with 2 majors, and my tuition was, this is the one I think you were quoting, Anika, $375 per semester. And then Hung Jung-wan is the person. And then Hung Jung-wan went on to say, because I didn't go into debt for college, and then in parentheses, who should anyway, I didn't feel the pressure to get a job immediately or feel the need for a high-paying one. Salary wasn't my concern. I could do whatever I wanted for my career. From Ireland, government grants help undergraduate students pay for living costs and education fees in Ireland. Some students have protested because they have to pay $3,360 a year. So they're out protesting and over 3,300.
Girl.
And that's like student fees for us, student fees, you know. And they're calling and they say, why
Right.
can't we do as well as other places in Europe? And then New Zealand, they've had, they actually pay a little bit more there. The person said my first year cost 7,000 New Zealand dollars, which is more, meaning 4,600 US dollars, not that much. Then it says after graduation, they have to pay 12% on what they earn above and a certain New Zealand amount to pay it back. So they have like zero interest loans. And then the person says, as a student doing one of the longest, most expensive degrees, living far away from home, my loan will be, and it gives the New Zealand amount, which I don't know how that converts over, but it looked like a pretty high amount. One of the higher ones looked like it was close to about 100,000 actually for this one, but there was a 0% loan for the whole amount. And it says we don't get charged interest, so I never felt like I was being crushed by it. In Brazil, post-secondary education increased 17% because of this investment. And the student says, I graduated in 2013. My college education cost me $25,000 in US dollars to get a full-time degree in economics. So, and then I'm not going to read the Philippines. I'll skip that one. I'll skip Turkey. Here's one from Scotland. And it looks like for the academic year, it says tuition is $2,300 there. For the dependent, says does depend on the program. And she says, I'm a European citizen, so my undergraduate tuition at the University of St. Andrews, which is one of the most reputable schools in the world, by the way, from 2012 to 2016. Like you said, some of these schools are, they're not slouch schools. And then it goes on to say, now my integrated master's and doctorate degree is funded through the UK-based Income, Economic, and Social Research Council, which covers tuition. It covers a stipend of £1,200 a month, which I supplement with part-time teaching. And then she made the comment, or Olga, because university was essentially free for me, I had a lot more freedom to pursue my interests, including further education, academic work. And I'll just read one last one. I'll skip a couple of these from Canada. The cost of my bachelor's degree from McGill University was 6,000 Canadian dollars per year for 4 years, plus books, student fees, and living expenses. And then the quote, graduating debt-free allowed me freedom of opportunity and choice to find my own path, try different jobs, including working abroad. I was able to find the right fit in industry and to walk away from companies and bosses who treated employees unfairly. So what were your takeaways, Anika?
So the takeaway was I want those kids to stop complaining about that $3,000. How about that?
Yeah.
Let's start there. But I mean, I wonder though, because like that last one that said they traveled abroad to work. I wonder how many of them do that. They come to the United States or anywhere, or go anywhere just to work. And it's crushing it. Like, I don't know if we can catch up, or even if our folks aspire to be that way. It does, sometimes, I hear the talk of some people, kind of sort of promoting it, but I don't know. I can imagine though.
Well, every country's different, as we see, right? There was a range in there.
Right.
But what you don't see is like a Columbia University here in New York City, $81,000 a year right now, cost of attendance. There's nothing like that really anywhere else in the world. And that's, I think, one of the reasons we wanted to share this article with our listeners. And it's a different model, right? It's higher taxes, more benefits. So you don't see as much take-home pay from your paycheck, but healthcare is a fraction of what our healthcare is, and education is not this exorbitant expense that stresses people out. So it's just kind of a different model. Now, one thing you are seeing over here is you're seeing certain states go to these type of models, like New York State, Vermont. Some other states have implemented some really great stuff like this. And across the country, you're seeing this sort of happening. Free community college, in some cases, free public state college if you stay in state afterward. And so, personally, I'm very encouraged by some of these programs and some of them are smart, because what you do is you're keeping the talent in your state. Some of the programs, you only get that if you stay in your state. So they're keeping the brain drained, especially places like the Northeast and Midwest, which are experiencing an out-migration of population to the South and the West. I think you have to be creative and come up with ways of trying to keep your talent in, in your own state. So we have some things like this, nothing really on the federal level. The closest thing to this would be our community college system, which is typically around $3,000. But I just thought it was, I thought this would be a good, article to discuss for our listeners. But once again, are we willing to make the investment? Denmark's taking 1.6% of their GDP. We're doing 0.9%. Many politicians would be down like this, but will the people vote them out when their taxes go up, right?
Likely, yeah.
So you kind of can't have your cake and eat it too.
Right. Facts. Man. Great article.
Awesome.
We would like to thank every listener who has financially supported our show.
We want to make sure that our friends of the show know that you absolutely can make a one-time gift, or you can sign up for one of our monthly giving levels. Recently, we received a lovely letter from a college counselor who made a gift and said she wants to support the show quarterly, and that is also okay.
And if you make a one-time gift or a quarterly gift, you may still be entitled to the same benefits we extend to our monthly donors.
That's right. For a gift of $60 or more within the first 12 months, you'll get all the benefits we provide in our Sustainer plan. And a gift of $120 or more in the first 12 months, and you'll get all the benefits we offer in our Expander plan.
So to support the show, all you have to do is go to yourcollegeboundkid.com and click the donate button. Either click the monthly gift tab or the one-time gift tab.
And be sure to visit our frequently asked question page, which is also located at yourcollegeboundkid.com for more details. This is also where you can learn about the Sustainer plan and the Enhancer plan.
Your financial support helps us defray the sizable expenses that it takes to deliver all of this great content that is aimed to empower you and your family's college admissions journey.
Different people have different abilities to give, but whatever you can contribute will be greatly appreciated, and it will allow us to remain commercial free. So thank you in advance.
Thank you.
All right. So before we transition into our book chapter discussion today, Anika, I wanted to say a few more things on hooks. Remember, we talked about hooks in episode 74, our last episode, and we said hooks are sometimes called tags, sometimes called tipping factors. Basically, they're institutional priorities that a school has, right? And the institutional priorities are basically what a school needs to do to bring in its freshman class and please all the stakeholders. And I want to address something back in, it might have been episode 59 or 60. I recommended, I think it was 61 actually, I recommended a book when we were going through the writing section with Susan Tree. And it's a book by Harry Bauld, and it's called Writing the College Application Essay. It's a classic book. It's like a 33-year-old book, but they did a reprint and the new edition came out, 25th year edition came out and updated it. And Harry Bauld was a college admissions. He did both boarding school admissions at the Putney School in Vermont, and he did college admissions at Columbia and Brown. He writes about the essay. And one of the things that Harry Bauld says in the group in this book, and I want to talk about it a bit. And so this is actually a quote from the book. He says, if you are not from one of the built-in lobby groups in the process, meaning the college admission process, and he identifies what he calls the built-in lobby groups. He says they're recruited athletes, one, development prospects, and then he explains what that is. He says those who can spare $12 million in pocket change to build the new gym, members of a historically underrepresented group, which is his third, what he calls built-in lobby group, and the fourth is children of alumni. He says all these applicants have special advocates for them in close contact with the admissions committee. And he says everybody else is just folks. Throughout his book, he refers to, are you in a lobby group or are you just folks? And I wanted to talk about that a little bit just to round that discussion. So first of all, what are your thoughts on that, Anika?
I'm intrigued. I want to hear more.
So what I would say is that there's one thing Bauld said I completely agree with, and one thing I disagree with. And so what I disagree with is that those are the only lobby groups, right? Because even last week, we talked about faculty kits have a hook. And if you're applying to an undersubscribed major, it can be a hook. Or if you've got geographic diversity, or if you're a celebrity kid, if you think, for example, Tom Cruise's kid was applying to a college, you think they wouldn't take him or her as a mediocre student? Of course they would. They get great publicity from that kind of thing. So and then artistic talent, right? Like playing the French horn or the cello or the bassoon or many, many other, instruments the orchestra may need. So I disagree with him that there are only 4 people that have a built-in lobby group. So I don't agree with that. But where I do agree with him is it's kind of true that if you don't have a hook and you apply to a selective school, you do kind of get thrown in a just folks bucket. Now, that's not going to be talk around the admissions. Someone's going to say, oh, you're a just folks. You're just folks. But being an unhooked applicant in the selective admission process is brutal. And routinely, and I did this in boarding school, I talk with my director of counseling all the time, and we would look at the kids that got in the highly competitive schools, and almost always they had some hook. And so if you don't have a hook, which once again is an institutional priority that the college itself finds hard to attract, so they're looking for more of that, whatever that is, then you are going to have to be much stronger than the average applicant to be competitive. And you can't even look at things like test scores and grade point averages and student profiles and think if you're just kind of there, you'll be competitive. No, you're going to have to be significantly above that. So I do think there's both truth and error to what he said. It's not only those 4 groups. It depends on the priorities of the institution. But it is true that applicants kind of get thrown into 2 pools, which is, does this kid bringing something to the table that's an institutional priority that we're finding hard to attract, that distinguishes them from, quote unquote, the average kid? Or are they just a typical kid of whom we have a lot like that and they don't stand out? So I wanted.
Okay, but where else is there to go though? If you don't have a hook, but you've got all the grades and the scores and the profile. What else is there to do?
You just have to be. That's a great question. You just have to be stronger than the average applicant that applies to that school. That's all. Like the schools take kids all the time that don't have hooks, but I'm just saying you can't be the average applicant from an academic standpoint. You have to be stronger than that.
So are you saying? Okay, so you're saying you have to max out your standardized tests, or you have to have a 5.0 in your. I mean, I'm trying to understand, like, what is that tangible thing that they need to do?
So for the most part, remember I talked about the double door approach to admissions, right? You got to get through the front door and then the back door. So the front door is the academic profile. So here we are talking primarily about your curriculum, your grade point average, and your test scores. Those things comprise the academic profile.
All right.
And so your test scores and your curriculum and your grades can't just be average. And so you can't just look at, because schools, if you go onto a college's website, they'll list their freshman school profile. You can take a look at it. They'll tell you. You'll be able to see who their average kid, what their criteria, their statistical profile is of who they admit. And what I'm saying is, if you're an unhooked applicant, then you're going to have to be stronger than that. But there's something else I want to comment on, because sometimes when this is explained, people get a misunderstanding, Anika. And what they think is that, okay, so then any old alumni or any old person of color as an underrepresented student can just waltz on in. And that's totally not true. Like, I've worked with some extremely talented alumni that did not get into highly competitive schools because the process is still really, really, really competitive. And the same is true for underrepresented students of color. Sometimes when I'm working with Caucasian and white families, and they'll say, I don't really have anything going for me. Like, I'm not a person of color. And I have to check them on that because, I looked this up, Anika. Princeton, Columbia, Stanford, Hopkins, Johns Hopkins, WashU, Northwestern, Emory, MIT, Brown, Rice, Chicago, Dartmouth, Wake Forest, Carnegie Mellon, Cal Berkeley, all highly selective schools, all took, on average, less than 4 Black kids per state. So they all enrolled under 200 kids. And if there's 50 states in the country, that's an average of less than 4 per state, and that includes recruited athletes. So sometimes, honestly, I think people have a natural bias that they may think that person of color is not strong academically. That may be their own unchecked bias they're not checking, because it's extremely strong kids for both alumni and for people of color that are getting through this process, and they are turning down exceptionally strong kids. The only time when I really see two things in here that I see that really do carry a lot of weight is the recruited athlete. That is the one where you'll see them jump and take a kid way out of the academic profile, especially if it's in a revenue producing sport.
Right.
And the development case as well. But the only thing is there's just not as many of them, whereas like recruited athletes at some school are gobbling up 30% of the spots. So anyway, I just wanted to comment on that. And in our next episode, we're actually talking about this topic again. So let's kind of table this. But this is 75, folks. We're giving you bonus coverage. This isn't even our chapter discussion.
Dun, dun, dun.
Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
All right, part 2. So now let's transition. So the title of actually our episode today is, will a college ever rescind my admission acceptance? And this is actually a great topic because I went to multiple sessions on this when I was at the Harvard Summer Admission Institute. Anika, but you read the chapter. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, whenever you talk about rescinding acceptances, I automatically think of the social media reasons first. I guess because those are always in the news. Somebody's always posting something, right? Those are the headlines, right? But nope, you slapped me right on back to reality. Starting off with those grades. Like, the grades are a big deal. Like, those seniors who felt like they got in, okay, I'm just going to slack off. I'm going to drop some classes. I'm just going to coast on out. No, that's like almost sounded to me, Mark, that might be number one. As to the reasons, I think you gave one of 4 reasons why they're being rescinded or can be rescinded.
Yeah, so I gave 4 in this chapter, but I think most schools will tell you that they do more rescinding of decisions over grades. Like on that session I told you I attended, one school said we did 12 of them this year over grades.
Good gracious.
Yeah, and almost, I hate to say this, Anika, but not almost every year, but most years somebody I work with has this happen to them. It's really painful.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really painful.
So, seems like that's something we should know by now. It seems like that should be an old trend.
That's why we're doing the podcast, Anika. The enlightenment.
I know, but darn. Oh my goodness, that's crazy.
Yeah, because you've heard of this term, right? Some people call it senioritis, right? Senior. There's a number of terms: senior slump, senioritis. And it's I'm in, so I'm just gonna put my little academic mind on cruise control. Right, that happens, and it happens a lot for early decision applicants, because a lot of times early decision applicants, they're being admitted with information from sometimes just off the 11th grade grades, and sometimes just off a progress report in the. And so what people don't realize is there is fine print in that agreement that says that we expect you to perform similar to the level you did when we admitted you. Now, from my experience, schools are very, very gracious. Like, I had a student I worked with last year. She was a straight A student, and she got in, and she had a really rigorous curriculum. She was involved in a lot of different things, student body president, a lot of different things. And then her grade slumped to 2 A's and 3 B's. And she was really, really worried about being rescinded. And I knew she wouldn't be rescinded. You're not going to be rescinded from going from grade A to BA, but it's when you have more than a letter grade drop. And also the more selective the school, the more they don't play.
I'm sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
The more they don't play. But you remember, besides grade dippages, any of the other reasons that schools rescind?
Well, the one that kind of surprised me, or maybe reminded me, I don't know, is not meeting deposit deadlines, like not paying your bill. And then I wonder if I was thinking about people forgetting. I don't know if you forget to pay your deposit. I don't know if that's a thing, or if it's just because they don't end up not wanting to go, or I don't know what the reasons, I don't know what the context is behind them not paying the deposits. But I'm assuming that there are some cases where they just didn't read an email or something. I mean, yeah. We talked about that what was that summer thing?
Summer melt.
Summer fall, whatever that's called.
Yeah, summer melt.
Yeah, summer melt. There you go.
Yeah, normally in these cases, normally in these cases, sometimes I think people just don't want to go, or they're having cold feet or whatever. But normally also colleges will really, really work with you if it was going to spam, but there comes a point where, you got to get stuff on because they got to go on about their programming and planning. And then,
Right.
a lot of times in cases like that, like it won't necessarily always rescind an acceptance, but it could be where, look, you're going to have to come spring semester now because you missed everything, schools that have record orientation, all kinds of things. But some of the other reasons schools rescind, another one in the academic realm that I think people don't think about. In fact, I know people don't think about this. And I know we talked about this in the chapter, and it has to do with changing your curriculum. So for highly selective schools, they're not only expecting that your grades will be similar, but remember, academic rigor is extremely important to them. So you can't just get in and then think you can drop a couple of your AP classes or your more advanced classes. Like that is really a reason that they'll rescind you, Anika. So the cardinal rule: if you're looking at making a grade change after you've been admitted early action, rolling admissions to a competitive school, or an early decision, you should consult with the admission office and ask them if it's okay with them that you make this, that you drop this class. Don't just assume that you can go to it. So it's not just grades; it's also reduced curriculum.
Right.
And do you remember what I said was, for me personally, what I've encountered is the most, the biggest area. I think most of the time, if I talk to colleges, they do more rescinding over academics than anything. But for me personally, do you remember what I said in the chapter that I've experienced more students having rescinding over?
Was it the behavior?
Yeah, discipline. So, it's like, why am I just working with a lot of kids that have problems? I don't know if it's that or what, but it's things like, alcohol, drugs, stealing laptops, stealing bikes.
Wow.
I'm thinking of different people. One kid that was flashing a knife. He didn't mean to be brandishing the knife to threaten, but he got booted out. And then you have to go back to the schools and explain why you were brandishing. There's all those kind of things. Like, schools don't play with that stuff. I mean, you have to. Some of them can amaze me how gracious they actually are when you can write a letter of contrition if they really believe you've learned your lesson from it. I've been amazed. There have been a lot of times when I was worried a kid would be rescinded. Maybe they'd be booted out of the school for drugs or something like that. And the school sometimes, depending on how gracious they are and depending on how selective the school is, some of them will overlook it. If it's stuff that they feel happens on their campus a lot, sometimes they have the mindset, this happens on our campus a lot. I'd rather you learn the lesson here now. But other ones, no, not so much.
So wait,
and the one you mentioned,
wait, Mark, what are they finding out about the behavior things? Like, okay, I got accepted.
Okay.
2 months later, I got suspended. How do you know I got suspended? Who's telling you?
So you asked, boy, we could do an entire podcast. I think we've done one on this before, Anika, but it was a long time ago. Yeah. Do you remember us talking about how different schools have different policies on whether or not they will notify a school if there is a suspension or an expulsion? Like, I worked at a school that we had a policy where if there's an expulsion or suspension, we are going to notify your schools that you were, about what happened. We just thought that was the right thing to do. And I do believe that is the right thing to do from an integrity standpoint, because when you made the decision, you made it without knowing this. And we feel you have a right to know that this student sexually harassed this person or, was caught selling drugs or using drugs or abusing alcohol. So we would notify. Now, there are schools, we talked about this week at, the conference as well. There are schools that have a policy that they won't do that. They put it right in writing. We will not notify about suspensions. And so that's a case by case thing, how that's handled. That's one of the hottest debates when you go to these conferences I go to. The colleges definitely want it because they want access to the knowledge. They want to minimize the risk. But there are schools that have the mindset of, I don't want these parents breathing down my neck. I don't want a lawsuit, so we're not going there. And that we're just cleaning our hands and what you don't know won't hurt you and moving on. So that's a hot debate, and that's not the subject of today. But that answers your question how they know, right? Because schools have a policy of telling them. And there is one other thing I have to say. This came up when I was this weekend as well. So the social media reason is growing, and it's growing a lot. Obviously, I'm at Harvard, and everybody kind of is following the news knows that there was a kid from Parkland down in South Florida who was admitted to Harvard, and then he was caught. Did you hear about this case, Anika? Did you hear?
Yeah, I was thinking of him. He was the most recent headline.
Yeah, he's the most recent, and so we talked about that a lot this weekend. Now they couldn't. William Fitzsimmons, the dean of admission, he could not reveal specifics about the case because they don't talk about a particular applicant, right? But for those of you who don't know, this kid had dropped the N-word, I think 13 or 15 times in a message board, had used very anti-women. I think he was calling women the B word or something, very demeaning to women. And then he'd made many anti-Semitic comments as well 2 years ago. And so they had expelled him. And some people felt like, where does freedom of speech end versus this, that, the other? So it was a big dispute and a debate. And I'm actually going to say something about this a little later, coming up in in our question today. But I'll tell you. So this, I was at a presentation, and one of the leaders said this year that there was a student who listed his social media account on the link. He put a link to the social media account, right, in his application. So then it was VP of enrollment. And so he said, well, he put this link here. I'm going to go in and check it out. And he started looking around, and he noticed that the kid had like the white power sign. He was putting in a whole bunch of different links.
Goodness gracious.
And basically, to make a long story short, they rescinded over it, because he had been admitted. And then they ended up rescinding when he went and saw this. And basically his point was, hey, if you're going to put it out there, we're going to check it out. You put your So social media is growing, and we've done a few podcasts on that. But it is growing in terms of the colleges that are looking at it, and it's growing in terms of. And then what he said, what was really, really interesting, Anika, this is for all the students listening and for parents. He said there literally are kids out there that keep a file on things that maybe their enemies have done on social media, and they will send it to us. They will send it to us when kids get in and said, you may want to know about this. And I was at this particular workshop I was at. I was there with 22 other college admissions officers. I was the only one on the college counseling side, and it was led by one of the Ivy League VPs of enrollment. And he said, "Let me ask you guys, who has a policy on social media?" And nobody put their hand up. And he said, "That's what I thought. We're all struggling to figure this out." He's like, "When you get one, send it to me and let me know." So it's something that everybody is grappling with, at the same time, when you show and expose who you are, we're going to consider and factor that in, but we're still trying to get the balance right. If that makes any sense.
It does. Whew.
Anything else on rescinding?
Nope. I think we done covered it.
I think we opened up more boxes, more Pandora boxes, and I think we probably raised more questions than we gave answers.
Clearly, yes, we have, but we're going to move on.
But hopefully we at least, you know what? If it scares people straight, that's good, right? If it makes people think, oh, I better be careful with my social media. Oh, I better be careful with my grades. Oh, I better be careful not to tank after senior year. Then that served a good purpose.
Yeah, that's right.
It's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Okay, our question this week comes from, I would say Mr. Jalen because I have a Jalen, but I've met quite a few girl Jalens.
This was a male. I know there's male. Yeah, this guy was a male from Pennsylvania. Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Jalen from Pennsylvania wants to know, Mark, if there are any bad questions to ask an admissions counselor. Excellent question.
So what do you think, Anika? I'm going to throw it back on you before I answer.
Yes.
So does anything come to mind for you?
For sure. Can you hook me up? I don't know.
Boy.
I'm sure it's been done. But I'm sure I know that it's going to come to me as you start talking, of course. But I know there are several that are bad.
You know what I thought you said it first? Because you know how the young people talk about hooking up? So I thought you said hook up. I'm like, oh boy, that would be totally inappropriate.
That too.
But
Listen, let me tell you
hook up
something.
and
Everything,
hook me up.
all of that.
That would definitely be crossing boundaries. I think that for sure. So I'll add a few. The first thing I want to say is you are 100% correct. There are definitely boundaries that you do not want to cross. When it comes to asking admission officers questions, and here we're kind of thinking of a fair setting. You walk up to somebody at a fair, or it could be at an information session. Remember, information sessions aren't only at the college. Sometimes they come to hotels. Sometimes they come to schools and do information sessions, or it could be email. So any of these, any type of interaction with an admission officer, we're applying all of it. But when you do it, there's really a dual purpose to your interaction and to your question asking. And first and foremost, what you should be thinking about is asking questions to help you to get a better understanding of the school in order to compare it to other schools on your list. So first and foremost, you're thinking about what can I learn through my interaction with this admission counselor so that I can figure out if I want to apply, or maybe you want to apply. Are you going to be number 1 on my list or number 3 or 5 or whatever? So that should be your first purpose, is learning important and pertinent information to help you figure out, are you going to apply or where's the school on your list? But there is a second purpose, which is making a favorable impression, because this is quite possibly the gatekeeper. A lot of times, admissions offices, most of the time, they're divided by region, and usually the people that they send into your neighborhood is the territory manager, also known as the regional admissions rep. They, in many cases, are the primary reader, or at least a secondary reader on your file, and they will have a significant role in who is admitted. And so you got a chance. So making a great impression is a tangential purpose of question asking, right? Mm-hmm. So I just want to lay out those 2 purposes first of all. One thing is being too personal. So I'm going to call this West Coast University just for sake of illustration, Anika. Okay. So what would be too personal would be something like, oh, I heard you're an alumni of West Coast University. Let's say that's the school you're talking to, right? Mm-hmm. I see they list their GPA and test scores as blah, blah, blah. Do you mind sharing like what your grade point average and test scores are? Like, that's just completely inappropriate, right? Like, that's like, that's like going up to like a woman at fair saying, "Can I ask you something? How much do you weigh?"
Right.
Like, you just don't do that. So there is such a thing. That would be category 1, being too personal. That would be number 1. I'm so embarrassed to say this, Anika, but the second one, I actually violated myself last week at Harvard.
Ooh, Mark.
I did. It's called being tone deaf. So one of the things we did an information session, and we went out on tours with students. And one of the things that I did when I was on the tour is I talked to the tour guide, and I asked her, I referred to this case, that where Harvard rescinded the acceptance for this guy from South Florida, conservative guy, for his remarks. And my question to her was, what do the students at Harvard feel about the decision? Like, what's the pulse of the student body? Are most students for it, most students against it? And she kind of blew me off. And at first I was like, man, I can't believe she blew me off. And then I thought about it. Oh, she was instructed not to talk about that, So there are like sort of inappropriate boundaries that you just kind of can't cross.
Right.
The most common mistake, though, by far, and the biggest complaint that I hear from admission officers is asking questions, and we've talked about this before, Nika, quite a few times, where the answer was already clearly on the website. Like, why'd you come all the way out here, or have me fly halfway across the country, leave my family, live in a hotel, rent a car, pay for all these meals for you to come out and ask me, can I ask you something? What are your average test scores? Do you offer criminology as a major?
Yeah, that is painful.
Do you offer lacrosse as a club sport? I mean, it's like, that is not, it's a waste of your time and their time, and it does not make a good impression. And it's what most people do, quite frankly. most of the questions aren't good. Now, the positive aspect is you have an opportunity to really impress by standing out because great questions actually are rare. And so you can stand out when you ask them. So asking frequently asked questions for whom an answer was easily on the website, not good. Another thing that's not good, and I used to get this a lot because I don't know if I ever told you this, Anika, but I was like a director of recruitment for 5 years when I did boarding school admissions. So I had to like come up with a whole recruitment strategy. And I was our maid road warrior because I love to travel. So not everybody liked to travel as much as me. I was on the road, all zigzagging all over the place, doing all this stuff. And one of the things that's not good is when people come up and they ask you like closed-ended questions. Like it's almost like staccato effect, or like you're trying to build rapport with somebody. So like they'll come up to you at a fair and they'll say something like, "How far are you from the closest airport?" You say 20. I would say 25 miles, Philly Airport. Okay. Can I start a club? If you don't have one I'm interested in, yes. Just find a faculty advisor. You know, and then can I take 6 classes at the same time? Quick answer, bang, they leave. Like this quick, short answer. Like you're also trying to build rapport, and you want to ask open-ended questions to get people talking about things that are important, and that's how you learn information. So that's not good. Another thing that's not good is sometimes people do this. They ask these leading questions. It's kind of like they have this beef with you. They have a beef about. No, they do. They have a beef. And they have an issue with you. It's almost like they have this gotcha tone. Like, so this would be this is the kind of thing. It would be something like, can I ask a question? Do kids of alumni have a better chance of getting admitted here? And like, you can kind of tell they're not alumni. They don't like the policy. And it doesn't present yourself in the most favorable light. It's almost like they're letting their bitterness ooze out in your presence. I don't know if that, and they kind of have like a contrarian vibe. Like, you know, you can tell, like they'll come up to you and say something like, "Is it true that you're in the middle of nowhere?" You know, no, it's true. No, I've read a lot. I've read that you guys are a party school. Is that true? Like it's like, I know you might not think this happens, but it does. You know, and
trust me, I may have done that a time or two back in my day.
Back in your day, hey, you're still here, you're fine. It worked. You know, and then
I totally believe it.
No, it definitely does, and people can pick it up a mile away. And the last thing that I wrote down is just, now this is a tricky one. What I'm going to say, and I'm going to be completely honest. Sometimes I still do this one, but some people don't like it at all, and some don't mind it. It's kind of asking the person about other colleges. So it would sort of be like you go up to school and say, "I know you guys have a lot of overlap with West Coast University. Like, how are you different from West Coast University?" Now, there are some people that will answer that. When I used to get that question, I would answer that question. I personally wasn't offended by it, but there are others that will be like, "You're going to get this answer a lot." Well, to be honest, I didn't go there. I don't work there. So you probably would be better off like talking to them about that. Like, just understand that not everybody likes that question. I'm happy to talk to you about our school, but I really don't feel like I'm, have the expertise to talk about a different institution. So what do you think, Anika? What do you think about some of those bad questions? Anything stand out to you?
Yeah, because I felt myself doing all of them at some point. But let's give Jalen some good. Like, what's a good question? I mean, and I feel like the heart of that answer should be that it's something that you genuinely just really care or don't know about. Or I don't know what is the good. What are the good questions?
Oh, there's just thousands and thousands of them.
Okay, let's do one. Two, maybe.
I mean, there's millions of them. I put them in buckets, right? There's questions about the culture of the school. There's questions about the experience. Good questions are questions of, the person you're talking with. What's their experience been? What, in your opinion, what do you think are the greatest strengths of the school? How has the school changed since you've been working here for 13, 15 years? What changes have you seen that happen? You can ask questions. Now, not everybody agrees with this. I don't have a problem with this. You can ask questions about specific majors and areas. There are some admissions people, and I don't agree with this, that feel like, how am I supposed to be the expert of the history thing? Go talk to someone in the history department. But I don't think you can expect students to even know that they can even do that. So I personally think questions about academic programs are good to ask. Open-ended questions. So there's so many questions, right? It's about
Yeah.
changes, trends, strengths, particular program. I mean, Anika, we could go on and on and on. I put 40 good questions up on the internet, though, in a blog article that I wrote to help
Oh,
people.
you sure did. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that would be enough.
Okay, Mark,
We won't get sidetracked if we go on the.
can I give Jalen some advice and you tell me if it's good advice?
Sure.
Ask a question that you genuinely want to know the answer to.
Definitely.
Like, don't go in there and ask a question because your counselor told you to ask this question, because it's going to come through that you really didn't want to ask that, because your eyes start wandering off to the side while the person's looking. I feel like I've seen that a time or two where kids sound so scripted because they read something in a book that said, okay, ask these 3 questions. And they really didn't care about that. They just asked them because they were just trying to say something. They were just trying to be heard.
So I definitely agree with that.
Which isn't technically bad, but yeah.
I definitely agree with that, but ask open-ended questions. Open-ended questions that are rarely asked in areas that are important to you. So someone might say, look, I legitimately want to know, what are your average test scores? That is the worst question to ask, right? So I agree that it needs to be something that you want to know. But remember the 3 clicks of a mouse rule. If you can click your mouse 3 times and get an answer, that's not a good question.
Okay.
And also, as I've said many times, less than 1% of my students, Anika, I feel, spend enough time on the college website. You need to be all over that website like white on rice.
All right.
And it should not be something that you can find there. But yeah, it should be something that's important to you. We totally agree. Just not something that's generic, that's closed-ended, and where the information is easily accessible.
Bam. There it is.
Bam. I like that. I got to put more bamming into my ending. Bam. There we go. It is all good. It is all good.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
Okay, friends, in the first part of my interview with Steve Schwartz, who is also a podcaster, and he has his own podcast, College of Admissions Toolbox, we talked about extracurriculars and how they impact the college admissions process. Today, we get into a broad range of different topics and how they influence admission decisions. I think you're going to enjoy it, so listen and enjoy.
But yes. I think that for in most situations, when we have parents coming to us spring of junior year, looking ahead to the fall, we have 2 options. Maybe we can take what the child already has at that point and work with it, or my recommendation would be to consider doing something perhaps small or is simply a natural outgrowth of what they've already been doing previously, whatever it might be.
Yeah. And that's where I think you're in the gray area where it's sometimes I agree, sometimes I don't. The way I come down is the student really want to do this? Or is it something that they're going to do because they think it helps them get in college? That smacks of packaging, and it's just the stuff that makes admissions officers not like educational consultants.
Yeah.
So, but if I have a student that really has energy and really wants to do something, then I'm comfortable with it. So that's kind of my piece. To me, that's where the authenticity comes in. Now, there are some things that I think we can do other than having them start a club or do something. And to me, one of the things is making sure that what they're already. Does that make sense?
You broke up a little bit. We'll have to fix this part. Okay. You said making sure, and then it got lost.
Yeah, making sure that what they're already doing is being presented in its most favorable light.
That is the key. That is, I think, that last part you said, all of it resonated, but I think it has to be authentic, I think, is key. Yeah. And having it be a continuation of what they're already doing, but maybe just going bigger with it. Maybe a hobby or interest, creating something out of that. It could be an event, it could be an organization, it could be an internship, but you have that trend line all the way from the beginning.
Yeah, and it can even be things even more subtle than that. It can be having your outside recommendation writer be a person in your file that writes about that, what you're doing, so that the impression is really, really substantial when it comes across the application. It can be using the additional information section in the Common App to describe in more detail than the 150 characters that you get, which is so limiting anyway. So you can present a much fuller picture. So those are the kind of things that I think can be done. And it's, the place I find it can really make the biggest difference are schools that do holistic admissions. Obviously, if you're just crunching numbers and doing admissions by the numbers, you're not even looking at essays or recs or any of that stuff, right? Which is a lot of schools. So if you're holistic, but you're not the most selective, because when you're the most selective, the bar for the EC, the bar for everything is so high, right? For grades, for scores, for curriculum, for essays, for recommendations, it's so high that it's just harder to stand out. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't make a difference. When I was doing boarding school admission, and we would, this time of the year, when we would have conversations with schools about who they're going to take and counselor calls, they would routinely refer to people by their EC. That was common, let's talk about the drummer. Let's talk about the soloist, what are our chances? Are we in play? That's oftentimes what the way the framework through how they would see the kids was through the prism of how are they going to impact our community extracurricularly.
I think that makes a lot of sense, though, because the numbers aren't human. The numbers look the same for everybody. The numbers make it a commodity game. And so
correct.
That may happen in some cases, of course, and obviously perfect scores make a big difference. But I think that for most applicants, the ECs are the one thing they can change late in the game if they craft it carefully based on an outgrowth of what they're already doing authentically. But beyond that, it's also the most human element. And yeah, it's natural. It would stand out because it shows the applicant's potential in a way I think that numbers don't. It shows where they might end up, what might their career look like. Obviously, it may not be in that particular niche or that particular topic, but the type of work they do, and of course, as we were discussing earlier, like how they deal with failure, how they grow from that, right? What they do next.
Yeah, the only thing that I would disagree with you a little bit on, I think essays are the easiest thing to change late in the game to have the most profound impact. Because literally, I can start with somebody in January. Well, January's late, but let's say November of the senior year, and the essay could, because the student's own voice is very powerful, and that is the one thing that there doesn't have to be a track record of something they've done at all. Where I just find there's a lot more scrutiny. I felt this when I did admissions and when I talked to admissions officers. Admissions officers' antenna is sky high for somebody who's doing something for the purpose of resume building. And they can sniff it. They can absolutely sniff it. And it's not that easy it's pretty easy for somebody to be exposed. And so I think overall the essays are the easiest way, really late in the game to have that influence. Now, the strongest applicants will have both, right? Like you need to be bringing something to the table and something to the community. So ideally you do both.
Correct. No, I should have been a little more clear in how I framed that. I think that obviously we're talking November right before deadlines. Yes, the essays, and obviously if someone hasn't done any prep, the essays. But talking now in the spring, I think there is enough time to do something with the ECs, probably over the summer, even into the fall of senior year. But yes, last minute, the essays are the big thing. And that's honestly what most families end up coming to me for, and probably you as well, I would imagine.
What would you say? Most people come to us for what?
For the essays towards the end.
Yeah, I think for me, people come to me for lots of things. Building the list is extremely important to them. Definitely building the list and overall strategies, right? Admission strategies. They just don't know all kinds of things. Strategies around tests, strategies around essays, strategies around visiting schools, strategies around communication with schools. Really all aspects of it. And then all the questions they have. People that need money, financial strategies, scholarship strategies. So I think all of that, it's sort of a little bit of everything. At least for me, maybe our clients are different. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be. I'd imagine that I tend to get more people interested in talking about ECs and essays just because that's what I focus on. That's my story too. So I think
Yes.
it does relate to that. And obviously being in the
Because
book and
people probably
everything.
have heard your story,
Yeah.
and maybe they're wondering, can you help me, to chart a path similar to what, worked for you? And that can work. It's a lot better if it's the student doing it, not the parent. And that tends a lot of times to be the parent. But sometimes it's a parent that sees a passion that their kid has, right? And that's when it can work.
Yeah, I think so. I think honestly we have to have everybody on board with whatever the plan is going to be. So there's a bit of negotiating between all parties, I think.
Yeah, like I have a student going to Yale this year, and one of the things I think that really was helpful for her was the research that she did on breast cancer. And she did it between summer of 10th and 11th, and then again between ninth and 10th, and then between 10th and 11th. And it was really high level research. But the whole thing, it was consistent with the whole family story, because there had been breast cancer in the family, significantly in the family, mom, grandma, multiple other people. So now the whole thing fit together, right? I see the passion. I see how it impacted you personally. I see what you're doing about it. But this is all stuff that she really, really wanted to do. And obviously she had like incredible grades and scores and curriculum and everything like that. But there's no question in my mind that research was a help for her. Because, I mean, you know what Yale's like. They're turning down plenty of people with perfect scores.
And that's where, again, it comes down to the idea that the numbers, at a certain point, it has to be something aside from the numbers. And I think your anecdote about them referring to people as the soloist or the violinist or something like that, there's something human that admission officers see in the person. They're not admitting an application, they're admitting a human being. And
definitely
the ECs and the essays and the rec letters and all those other quote unquote soft factors, I think they can make a bigger difference sometimes.
No question, because and this is something that the average person doesn't understand, because they tend to say stuff like, I don't get it. Like, I got let's say it's a highly selective school, and they might say something like, you're not going to believe this, Mark, but there's a student in our school and they got like 1590 on their SAT and they didn't get in XYZ school. And this other person got like 1420 and they got in, or whatever. Right. And that doesn't compute in their mind. They think, and they don't understand that the way I explain it to my students and families is the testing is almost like a pass fail. Once you get in range, you're fine. And I interviewed Rick Clark from Georgia Tech on our podcast, and he's like, we don't even hardly even discuss it. It's all, their middle 50% is 1450 to 1550. They rarely see somebody that doesn't have good scores. So it doesn't differentiate at all. And it hardly ever comes up in the conversation at all. It's like, it's just like glance at it. Now, mind you, if they were seeing, 960, 1050s, 830s, you know what I mean? 12, I'm not trying to say scores and curriculum and grades and things are not cutoffs, because they absolutely are. But at the most highly selective schools, I heard Yale say recently that you literally almost could take their denial pool and replace it with their admit pool, and you almost wouldn't notice a difference.
That's how strong it is on numbers.
Yeah, that's how strong it is on...
And everything else too, potentially, there, because there's such a small pool they can take.
Yeah. Just the whole academic profile, right?
Yeah,
from GPA to test scores to SAT, ACT to AP to subject tests to courses taken. They all look really strong, And so then it becomes, okay, what are these other factors?
Yeah, then it becomes this idea of diminishing marginal returns with additional time devoted to test prep. If you're already getting a 1450 or a 1460, why spend another year struggling to get a 1550 and instead maybe explore your other legitimate, authentic interests and build something interesting out of it?
And not only that, but even if you struggle to get that 1550, I mean, I have a lot of students that, that I work with this year that have those really high scores that they didn't get in a lot of schools. Like, they got in other amazing schools, but that is if you look at the average score profile at the most selective school, their denials are ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So not only would it maybe be hard to struggle to pull yourself up that extra 100, it actually wouldn't really increase your chances of admission that much at the most select. I'm talking about the most selectives, right? Like you go down a level and yeah, the scores can make a huge difference.
Well, I think the top schools like Yale, they don't need to worry about their rankings with that the slight differences in SAT scores. Maybe lower ranked schools might care about something like that.
Yeah, and it's not even about the ranking. It's just that someone just stands out more in their applicant pool because they just don't see as many people like them. You know what I mean? So at every level, right? If they're just assessing it not from a ranking standpoint, but just let's say their goal is, as Deb Shaver, former dean of admission, I interviewed her from Smith on, and she said, my goal first and foremost is to keep my faculty happy. I got to keep my faculty happy. So they want, intellectually engaged, critical thinkers who are interesting. So even if you're not even looking at ranking, you're just looking at, I want to deliver, I want to increase the intellectual fiber of our community, keep the faculty happy. At the less selective level, you can stand out more just off of the pure academic stuff.
And there are also just the idiosyncrasies of what they're looking for in that year's class and who they don't have yet. What kind of person are they lacking that they would like to fill? So there's a certain degree of randomness to it based on who else has been applying that year.
Oh, there's huge degrees of randomness to it.
Like, do they have, maybe they want a trombonist and they don't have one yet. No, look, you come along, you play the trombone, great, you're in, as long as you meet up the criteria.
Yeah, I mean, recently heard Princeton's dean of admissions say this exact thing. Like they got to the end of their class and they realized that, oh, gee, we don't have enough brass, and they're hearing from the orchestra conductor, we're not going to be able to play certain pieces.
Yeah.
So they went back and looked at their pool and they plucked off some really talented people. And yeah, so there's the randomness of what they need in any given year. And that could be lots of things, not just extracurriculars. That can be a major. That can be, we're going to maybe cancel German unless we have more people apply, or our linguistics department is in danger of surviving. So that can be an undersubscribed major. That can be all kinds of things. And then there's institutional priorities, which is huge, right? You look at these people that work at the religious schools. Almost always, I've seen it. I was at a Quaker school, and yeah, we're on the lookout for Quakers, and not that many around. And so even if that means we're at 10 or 12%, that was a big deal. Same for Jesuit schools. And anyone I've ever known that's worked at a Jesuit school, that was a bit of a priority. And so you've got your institutional priorities, then you've got the randomness of who's reading your file, which is a huge factor.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Our book for the week is called The Gift of Failure: How the Best Parents Learn to Let Go So Their Children Can Succeed by Jessica LaHaye. Now, one thing I like about this book is it's not preachy. Jessica LaHaye opens up by sharing her own overprotective parenting methods and how they failed. The book discusses how modern parenting is defined by an unprecedented level of overprotectiveness. Parents race off to school to deliver forgotten assignments. They challenge the teachers on report cards that are disappointing. They mastermind their children's friendships, and they interfere on the athletic playing field. As a teacher and writer, LaHaye explains, even though these parents see themselves as being highly responsive to their children's own well-being, they aren't giving their children the chance to experience failure or the opportunity to learn to solve their own problems. And she explains how this ability for kids themselves to figure out how to solve their own problems is critical for success in life. LaHaye believes that overparenting has the potential to ruin a child's confidence and undermine their education. We will now return to the final part of my interview with Steve Schwartz.
Yeah, so I guess the message that there's a couple things that come to mind here. I mean, of course, there's the message that there is an element of randomness where if you get rejected, it may just be that you didn't have the trombone and someone else did, or you were in a Quaker and someone else was, and that alone could have an impact. But then the other thing I'm thinking about is just how funny it is, the American system that we have, how strange it looks to folks from other countries where they're saying, what do you mean the person with the 1450 gets in over the 1550? It just is incomprehensible to them in other countries where they think we're very soft for being so holistic when the numbers to them don't lie.
Yeah, I agree. So many other countries just go by the numbers, but I think our system is infinitely better because I think it's much more akin to like if you had a company and you needed to hire people, you're really looking at all aspects. So you're looking at what are our institutional needs right now. You're looking at what is your personality, what are your interests, are you interesting? Then the whole ethical, moral piece, all that. Can you do the job, of course, but you're looking at how you fit into the whole. Like you're looking at the community. And I think that that's important, because you're bringing somebody into a community. It's not an individual person. So what piece of the puzzle they fit in making the community what it is important to making that community the type of community that you want to have. So I love how the American system is holistic. I hate it when schools just crunch numbers, and like so many, especially less selective schools do, and a lot of big state schools do. I hate that because people are so much more than a number.
I love it too. And it's the funniest thing. This American system, we have it works. And I think we're seeing that more than ever now with the rise of tech and startup culture and STEM, because there's this idea that, in other countries where they're afraid of failure, they're afraid of being entrepreneurial, they're afraid of trying things where they don't know what's going to happen and experimenting. And obviously Americans are all about the experimentation and going to the frontier and the can-do spirit. And we'll try to figure it out even if it doesn't work the first time. And it's funny, I work with a lot of STEM kids who are doing like startup type things or tech and entrepreneurialism and entrepreneurship, excuse me. And I had this one applicant this past cycle who applying to MIT got in, and he couldn't stand academics. He couldn't stand the schoolwork and the busy work and the assignments, but he was obsessed with robots. Like he wasn't goofing around on the side in the afternoons and weekends. His parents couldn't pull him away from the robot club and the robot competitions. And that's what he was doing. And standardized test numbers wouldn't have reflected that because his math was high, right. But obviously his verbal wasn't, that wasn't his thing. He didn't care. He wouldn't devote a single iota of effort to it. And maybe he should have, of course, but his passions lie elsewhere.
Yeah. And I'm sure that came to his application.
Yeah.
And and that probably was what differentiated him. I do find at the highest levels doing an exceptional EC that's distinctive can absolutely make a difference. There's no question. I mean, I was just with a friend of mine who's a former rep from Vanderbilt last week, and I was talking about, let's do a deep dive. Like, who gets the Cornelius Vanderbilt? Who gets the Ingram? Who gets the Chancellor? Like, those are three of their merit scholarships. And because, Vanderbilt's tough getting in Vanderbilt these days if you're not 35 or 36 ACT or 1500s plus. It's just they're very, very score conscious, and their pool is so strong. And what did she say? Oh, that's the kid who did this ridiculous thing in another country, like when they were like 14 or something. Like when you're competing for those. Obviously, when you're applying a highly selective school and then you're trying to get a substantial cost of attendance scholarship, what the pool is like, right? It's ridiculous. And there's almost nothing you can just do up pure academics. I suppose if you were the Einstein, then, but it's just so hard to do that. Like how many kids are like that?
No, it's true. It's true. I think that it's just gotten tougher than ever. The numbers they keep rising.
Yeah. And, it's funny because, we're recording this just after regular decisions came out, and I do a lot of collaboration with, I have a lot of kids in boarding school because I did boarding school admissions for a long time. So I have a lot of kids. I'll place them in boarding school and then I'll work with them on their college piece. And so in doing that, boarding school college counselors, they're some of the best. They've come from great institutions, and I collaborate with them. And so I had multiple conversations with boarding school college counselors this week after the regular decisions came out. And it was like, wow. It was like, it's just really getting tougher and tougher and tougher. And I know myself, I'm doing a lot more work to expectation set with families, because it's very hard for parents to realize how much certain schools have changed from their era. I've seen it. There's schools to me that literally would take almost every kid, from when I was doing boarding school college counseling, take every B- kid. And now they're being nitpicky and saying, well, this kid didn't take 4 years of Spanish. They only took 3, and they have everything else that's amazing, and they're booting them out. So we got to recalibrate. And the good news is there are amazing other schools out there. It's just trying to get people to realize that some of these other schools truly are amazing.
Well, exactly. Yeah. It's about not being too married to one particular school. And then one thing that's coming to mind for me, which is what I always tell families is, if the numbers aren't doing it for you, like the test scores aren't getting you where you want to go, you could redirect elsewhere.
Yeah.
Because I think at a certain point for many kids, they just can't compete on the numbers. There's too much competition on these standardized tests.
Yeah. And the hard part with testing is testing knocks you up, but doesn't get you in.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have the testing, really the whole academic profile.
Right. Even if you got the number, you might still not get in.
Yeah. Yeah. So it doesn't get you in, but it will knock you out.
Yeah.
And now, of course, there's always caveats even with that too, right? If you're like a star football or basketball player, you don't really need the numbers.
Right.
I remember this was some time ago, but I had SAT scores for every single football program in the country.
Oh, wow.
And so you would see a school like a Notre Dame. And Notre Dame was actually one of the higher ones, and the average was an 898 on the team, for who they admitted. And compared to an average typical student in the mid to 1400s. And so, there were quite a few schools that were. So, so if you're bringing money into the institution, you're a big money maker, then there's some difference today. Yeah, so we're not talking about that.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about earlier, like institutional priorities, right? It does come back to that. The football player is like the trombonist, but only more so.
Much more so.
Yeah.
When I visited University of Georgia for the first time, they're like, the first students that get priority over anything when it comes to course selection are the football players. Never heard anybody say that to me before. This is like right in the open state. Like this isn't a private one-on-one meeting. This is like the information session with everybody. Yeah. They're saying why, and it was mission director. He said, I know you're thinking why, because they bring us lots of money. That's what he said. I mean, if you're paying your coach $5 to $7 million, how much money are you bringing into the institution?
You're the highest paid person in the university, right?
Yeah, like 7 times the president a lot of times. Yeah, great. So what do you want? Do you want to wind down, Steve, or anything else you want to comment on? What do you think?
No, I think we pretty much hit it. This was awesome. This was a pleasure.
Yeah, I appreciate, I love to network, and the idea of sort of collaborating with somebody else doing the work is always fun, and hopefully our listeners enjoyed it, and hopefully we challenged each other as well. So thanks for reaching out to me. I've enjoyed this.
Definitely. Before we sign off, do you want to share with folks listening on my end the best way to get in touch with you and your book and your podcast and all that?
Yeah. And then you can do the same as well. So so my website is schoolmatchforyou.com, and that's school, SCHOOL, match, MATCH, and it's the number 4 and the letter U.com. So I've got a lot of information up there, including direct links right to the podcast. And the podcast is yourcollegeboundkid.com. I'm sorry, Your College Bound Kid. We do have our own website, yourcollegeboundkid.com. We're on every major, wherever you listen to podcasts, wherever you listen to Steve, you can get us. So whether it's Spotify or iTunes or Apple or Stitcher or iHeartRadio or whatever, we're kind of Google. We're all over the place. So, and then I do have a book I wrote called 171 Answers, and it's a reference book. So it's a great tool, and we get great feedback from people that listen to that. And you could get that at 171answers.com, or it's also on Amazon.
Perfect. Well, I'll make sure to include links to all those in the show notes on my end for the description for this episode. And then for those listening on your end, again, my name is Steve Schwartz. I host the College Admissions Toolbox podcast. My website is collegeadmissionstoolbox.com. And the podcast you can find on Spotify, Google Play, iTunes, of course, and pretty much everywhere else.
Yeah, you know what I find too, Steve? People that listen to podcasts, they just have such a thirst for knowledge. They can't get enough of it. And so I'm sure a lot of our listeners will appreciate us introducing, another resource for them to check out.
Exactly. So, everyone on my end can listen to your back catalog and vice versa.
Yeah. Thanks again. And next time I'm in New York, I do get to New York because I'm on a board there called Go to College New York City, where we help some really gifted and talented but under-resourced kids get into college. And so I'm up there for board meetings a couple times a year. So next time I'm in New York, let's grab a coffee.
Excellent, man. Let's do it. Definitely.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Mark. Be well.
Next week in the news, college sports are affirmative action for rich white students. And we'll be in chapter 76 of 171 answers. And Mark shares mistakes that us parents make in the college application process. And next week's question is from a listener who wants to find out which schools offer the need blind or no loan financial aid. And Mark will be in part 1 of his interview with Mr. Greg Roberts. He's the Dean of Admissions at the University of Virginia, as they talk understanding the differences between public and private universities.
Okay, Anika, I'm still in the clouds. I'm still on cloud 9 from the Harvard Summer Admission Institute.
The Harvard clouds. Yes. Tell us about the Harvard clouds.
So first of all, there were about 20 different colleges there, VP of enrollments and deans, and the attendees were either college counselors or college admissions officers. They were there for just more training, and it was set up in a way where you had lots and lots of time just to have lunches, breakfast, casual conversations. So I got to basically get almost all the questions I've ever wanted to ask a whole group of people at one time. I'm sure there's some people that were like running away from me, like that guy again, but it was good. And there were a couple of main takeaways that I have. David Coleman came and spoke to us, who is the CEO of the College Board. Of course, everybody wanted to hear about the ECD. And so I got to talk to him one-on-one as well as in front of the whole group about the ECD. And so here's some takeaways. One, the College Board is not backing down at all over the ECD when it comes to market share. So I asked the question in front of everybody. I said, what happens if counselors of privileged kids tell their kids take the ACT because there's no ECD and you start losing market share? And he responded really forcefully. Everybody kind of clapped. He said, if we lose market share, so what? Tough nuts. This is the right thing to do. He said, you know what? When we integrated Southern test centers, we lost market share and it was the right thing to do. So we continue to do it. We're not backing down. And then he said, don't you think we've thought about the fact that the ACT may not do this? We're providing school information on a school, and colleges are going to be able to use it whether the ACT decides to do it or not. So they're kind of smart about that, right? Because they're developing a school profile where you can see a person's scores in the context of their school. So they've thought about that. So that's one thing. Another thing, and this is interesting. They admitted that they botched the rollout. They said, we botched the rollout on the marketing of it. He did fault the Wall Street Journal a lot because the Wall Street Journal was the first one to call it an adversity score. The Wall Street Journal kind of broke the story before the College Board got to do their release. They called it an adversity. Nobody at this conference called it an adversity score. In fact, they laughed at that term. It was always the ECD. But Coleman said, we are doing a whole new rollout in 90 days, which now will be probably by the time people hear this, 80 days. And we're going to present it completely differently. And nobody's been able to call this an adversity score. It is achievement in context. And it is the farthest thing from a personal adversity score. It doesn't have anything to do with your personal adversity. It will show how your achievement compares to the others in the context of your school and in the context of your neighborhood. And so people were looking forward to kind of the new rollout. They're not changing the core of it. They're just more on the marketing side. They're going to roll out a new release. And he said, look for that.
Okay.
Some schools are focusing on the school side more than the neighborhood side. So not every college that was there was going to focus so much on the neighborhood score, but they loved the school score. And they all talked about how we don't get all this information that they're providing. Now, the other thing I can tell you is that the College Board worked really, really, really closely with all of these schools in the rollout of this, and they continue to do that. And so, remember at one time when we talked about this, Nika, and I said, let's see what the elite schools do?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll tell you something. They all think this is a great idea. This is not going anywhere. I had one tell me this probably saved the College Board from more and more schools going test optional. This is the most brilliant thing they've ever done. So It is not going away, and the colleges love it. So there's a couple of things to say. And finally, they did say, listen, it's going to impact probably at most 3% of the students that are admitted. It's not going to be some wholesale radical 25% new kids are going to come in, but they're probably, from their initial testing, about 3% of kids are being identified as being extraordinary and having overcome such hardships that they're getting spots where they previously wouldn't have been admitted. So First is the ECD. It is not going anywhere. People love it. And but there will be a new rollout in about 10, 11 weeks. Next thing, a cloud hanging over this thing is Rick Singer, what I call the side door hustle, what they call varsity blues. That continues to be like this dark cloud hovering over college admissions. I went to a whole session on that with Harvard's chief legal counsel. That was fascinating because Harvard's involved because the guy Riddell who was taking the test, they call the smart guy flying in, taking the test for people. He was like a Harvard alum.
Mm-hmm.
So the plot was even more complex than I thought as I learned about some of the things that were actually done. But here's how I see this thing, and this is major, Anika. So what's happening is schools are looking at this and like, oh my goodness, I cannot believe how sophisticated this plot was. You know, the fake IDs and all that stuff that were used. And it's causing them to do their own introspection of their own admission process so that they can, stop these kind of shenanigans, right? And here's the biggest thing that I see that was new that was rolled out is a number of schools are going to be adding a component to their application that it's like a box that people have to check. And it says, by checking this box, you agree to allow us to audit your application. And if we find anything to be inaccurate, we will rescind an acceptance decision. And so a number of schools are going to be doing something similar to that. And guess what area that they're about to go into to really hunker down on and check? Take one guess. What do you think?
Where is that? Athletics.
That's a great guess. Well, they're definitely cracking down on that. No, they're definitely cracking down on the admission liaison to the athletic department as well as the athletic liaison. That's a huge one. But that actually wasn't the answer I was looking for, but that was a good one. What they're doing is and could you remember when we did an article on students embellishing their accomplishments, but no one was checking? And we did an article.
Right, yeah.
And people are like basically making up false claims, but admission officers don't have the time to go back and check.
Right.
Well, a bunch of them are going to start checking. Now, this is something that is being done right now by the Surface Academies. The Surface Academies use their alumni to check. They're like, look, do you want this person hindering your reputation? Go back and check their stuff. And in the University of California system, they've had for decades, 2% of applicants randomly got checked. But now it's more than just random. Like if they have any suspicion at all, they're creating different systems. And I asked a question because it was a very prominent person up there said, oh, a lot of us are doing this. So I asked the question, well, how do you know a lot of you are doing this? Are you all talking about getting together and all coming up with one form? And they said no, because that would be like an antitrust violation. So it's not going to be like one form, but everybody's doing their own thing. But they're going to be absolutely cracking down and auditing and making sure that what people claim they did in their extracurriculars, which is athletics, right? Is actually, or they're going to be more rescinding of decisions.
Okay.
Another thing is there's still like tension about the Harvard's affirmative action case, which is now spread to Yale, UNC. That's all over, and that's spiraling now into other things. Like, I never thought this was serious, but there are really serious attempts and things in Congress right now looking at legacy admission. There's stuff looking at development admission. So there's like a bill that says if you give to a university, your kid cannot be admitted within a certain length of time after you gave. So they're really there's legislation going after development admits, going after athletic admits, and people are really tense around the affirmative action case. The humanities continue to be a cause of concern. People are not signing up for the humanities. And as one leader said, there was a time when it was a hook for a male to apply to humanities. Now it's a hook for females to apply.
Oh, wow. That's
how few applicants are getting. And we're really concerned about that department. So colleges are putting a little thumb on the scale for people applying. Now, don't run out there and just say you're interested in the humanities if you're not, listeners. That's the problem when you share this. Because I talked with many
you heard all the little brains working, twirling.
Well, no, I talked to so many schools and they say, you know what, we'll be reading an application and the thing has STEM all over it. All the activities, the internships, the courses, the test scores. And then the person will say they're interested in the humanities, and they'll be like, come on, get out of here. You just read an article. So they can see through that a mile away.
Oh, my goodness gracious.
We already mentioned one of the things already. I'm not going to comment on that. Social media being scrutinized more, no one having the policy. People need to have the policy. And then the last thing I'll say is trends. Publicly funded colleges. So for the longest time, right, state public colleges in the states were getting funded by state governments. And then as states got in more and more financial constraints, they started pulling back and not supporting their state institutions as much. I mean, let's look at a state like Virginia that used to get over 70% of their operating budget by the state, and now it's down to 10 to 12%, Anika. So these are drastic cutbacks.
Wow.
So what happens is that there's actually a change in nomenclature. So these schools at one time were called publicly funded, and now they're being called publicly supported. And there's great fear, and I was on a lot of the public schools, there's great fear that the next step is going to be to pull back from that as well and say, well, you know what? Most of the students here are from out of state anyway, or a large percentage are out of state anyway. Why are we even supporting them? Because what's happening is colleges are having to recruit out of state to get triple the tuition because they're not getting the money from the state anymore, right? So now some states are talking about, well, why should we support you if half the kids aren't even coming from our state? So anyway, those are some takeaways. What do you think?
What did they feed y'all there? What does one get to eat when they go on a fancy trip like this?
You know what? I'm not going to tell you, but I got on the scales. I was like, 8 pounds. They fed us like kings and queens.
So good, great food is what you're saying.
Oh my goodness. They would like give you this huge lunch, like, gourmet. Because this whole thing was like $4,500. It's a lot for 6 days. And then you'd go into a workshop, and then you'd come out and they'd have all these desserts. I'm like, you just fed me like a king. I attended a 75-minute workshop, and I have a dessert buffet.
And you were obligated to eat all of it. Like, you cannot not eat it. I felt
like, you know what? I'll probably never get this opportunity again. Bump it. I'll deal with the scales later.
Go walking when we finish recording. You'll be fine.
More than walk. Fast. Jog.
That's
do a marathon. Like, goodness.
Awesome.
But it was extraordinary. If anybody gets an opportunity to go, it is really, really, really worth it. It was really spectacular. And I'll from time to time share other insights as we go on with the podcast. But just wanted to let our listeners hear some of the highlights from the trip.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. And if you found this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening station. And please be sure to click the share button and send this to someone you know that could really use this information. Your College Bound Kid is produced by John Lockenbaugh. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Artwork is by Andrea Togo. And marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. If you want to get a copy of the book, 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, you can go right to 171answers.com. And if you want to have a college coaching session with Mark, you can send him a text to area code 404-664-4340.
And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like for us to answer on the show, please email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. That's questions with an S at yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in the episode. We don't like your questions. We love your questions, so send them our way. And by the way, check out our website, which is just simply yourcollegeboundkid.com. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.